Welcome back to the MOOC course titled Qualitative Research Methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course. We have discussed some strategies of inquiry, or we've started an introduction into the strategies of inquiry in qualitative research methods. We discussed ethnography last time. Today we will discuss a special form of ethnography, and that is called autoethnography. So in the previous class we discussed some genres of ethnography. Autoethnography is a specialized form of ethnography. We talked about ethnography, what ethnography was. We talked about ethnography being a process and product of describing and interpreting cultural behavior. And I'm revisiting this for the benefit of those who may have who may need some revision, because this is slightly more difficult, but it's a very, very interesting field of study. So we'll go back to the slide and then we will move on. Ethnos, we talked about what, how the term ethnography comes into being. We talked about, ethnography being composed of two different terms, ethnos and graphic. So ethnos denotes a people, a race, or a cultural group, and so it is a social scientific description of a people and the cultural basis of their peoplehood, which means how they really are, who they are, what do they do, what comes out, what happens, how they live, how they behave, how they are, the essence of being as expressed in their behavior, and that is captured in the form of ethnography. Today we are going to talk about autoethnography. What is autoethnography? And this is from a paper by Ellis and Bochner in the same book, Handbook of Qualitative Research, that I've been telling you about, and that's the book I'm referring to. That is one book that you can actually keep as a real, it's a very fat handbook, so it's not really handy for a handbook. I think this weighs about probably more than a kilo. But then this is one, if you want one good book for qualitative research, this is one good book that you can have. So Handbook of Qualitative Research, and there is a paper by Ellis and Bochner in which they describe autoethnography, and that is what we are going to talk about in this lecture. So autoethnography is an autobiographical genre of writing and research that displays multiple layers of consciousness connecting the personal to the cultural. Back and forth autoethnographers gaze, first through an ethnographic wide-angle lens, then focusing outward on the social and cultural aspects of their personal experience. Then they look inward, exposing a vulnerable self that is moved by and may move through, refract and resist cultural interpretations. So they go back and forth. They go back into their memoirs. They try and find out what is it that their current life was affected by. They may discuss what they experienced, and they tie in what they experienced, what they went through, what happened, to its impact in the current scenario in light of their knowledge as researchers. So it is a way of describing one's own life as it applies to the current situation, and how things in one's life are interconnected, and how this interconnectedness of a life represents the interconnectedness of experiences in the lives of a specific set of people. So you become a representative. The researcher becomes a representative of a larger population and goes back and forth. You revisit something, then you say, this is how it has impacted me. And then in going back and forth between what one may have experienced, and that evokes a whole lot of emotions, which we'll talk about in a minute or so. And then, you connect it, you bring in your knowledge of a researcher, you try and understand your experiences in light of what you know about research, of what you know about culture, and you try and connect it to whatever you are experiencing today. So it's this interconnectedness of different events that a researcher tries to understand and analyze. As they zoom backward and forward, inward and outward. So you look at things from the perspective of a person who is experiencing things. And then you move out of your being and you try and see things objectively. Then you go in and you tap into something you have experienced. Then you move out and then you say, okay, this is how it makes sense in the larger scheme of things. So you zoom backward and forward, inward and outward. Distinctions between the personal and cultural become blurred, sometimes beyond distinct recognition, because we must understand that every single person is contributing to the cultural experience of a race, of a community, of a people. So how you have interpreted as a participant within a situation, as a member of a particular culture, of a particular community, how you have interpreted, it's not only what you have experienced, it's also your interpretation. So how one has interpreted one's own experiences will contribute or will impact how one reacts to those experiences, right? So when we experience something, we react to that experience, we form opinions, we interpret something, then our actions, our reactions to what we experience feed into the overall experience of this community, of this collective of which we are a part. And our reactions, our responses to the stimuli we receive, which are in turn based on our interpretations of the responses we receive, then act as stimuli for the others in that community. So our biased opinion has a very strong place in how the community experiences a particular phenomenon, a particular event, how they do their life. Because whatever I am doing is affecting you as a person, and whatever I am doing is a result of how I have interpreted whatever I have experienced. So my bias is an integral part of the stimuli I send into the environment. So we cannot dissociate ourselves completely, but when we do autoethnography, we recognize these biases. We try and understand the reasons for our responses to stimuli. We try and understand why we experienced what we experienced. It's not just the physical experience. The experience also, is rounded off or is enriched by how we interpret the physical experiences we are going through. So we talk about, something called as our emotions are heightened. We see something. If my health is not okay, I am likely to either overreact or underreact to certain situations. I may see a friend, and if I am not feeling well, I may not feel that happy about seeing a friend. There may be there was a tsunami in Japan recently. There was actually an earthquake that caused a series of tsunamis in Japan. Now imagine the reactions of different people to this particular event. If you were to capture as an anthropologist, or as a behavioral scientist or a social scientist, if we went around trying to assess the cumulative trauma that people experience, that collective trauma would be influenced by the stage of life we were in. If you were vacationing in Japan and you experienced a tsunami and you lost all your belongings and you had to struggle to get back home to whichever country you had come from, and you had never experienced a tsunami in your life, the way you would experience, the way you would express your experience of the same tsunami would be very different from the experience of another person living in Japan who had lost the same amount of physical things, who had been hurt in exactly the same manner as you had been hurt, but who was not there on a vacation. Maybe somebody was there for some sad event, maybe somebody was there for a funeral, maybe somebody was there for something else. So they may have lost all their belongings, and God forbid, I hope this hasn't happened to anyone, but if you were one of those who were affected, the way you would describe these experiences would be very different, and that would add to the collective trauma. If you're already in pain and some more pain comes, we don't really recognize the incoming pain as that much. Or some of us may say, I'm already hurting, this vulnerability heightens my senses, and we become oversensitive, or we become, I won't say oversensitive, we become even more sensitive to stimuli that we may have considered normal in the past. And that's why I'm saying that when we talk about autoethnography, we zoom in and zoom out, zoom in and zoom out. We say, this is what I experienced, this is why I experienced it, this is what happened to me, I feel the pain, I go through the same emotions, distance myself and say, this is what happened to me, and this is why it happened to me, this is why I was experiencing X. Maybe if the circumstances had been different, the same physical experience would have been interpreted in a different manner. So the ability to critically analyze is critical to an autoethnographer's work, and that is exactly what this is telling us. And that enriches the research experience, because we become representatives of a set of people when we do autoethnography. Forms of autoethnography: we have short stories, we have poetry, we have fiction, we have novels, we have photographic essays, personal essays, journals, fragmented and layered writing, social science prose. So different ways in which we do autoethnography. We write about our own lived experience, and you'll find a lot of examples of this. And I told you last time also, when we were discussing ethnography, when people write about events that have affected their lives, and when people collect these stories, they enrich, they contribute to the historical experience of an event. For example, the Indo-Pak partition, for example, the Punjab riots, for example, the train accident that happened a few days ago. So how different people experienced the same train accident would be very different, and stories would be collected by journalists, and somebody would explain that, somebody would explain, somebody would describe what happened to people when they were traveling in a train, when the train suddenly derailed and more than 100 people, I think 150 people probably died. So, so different stories are collected at certain times. So these are some forms of autoethnography. Okay. The focus of autoethnography is on concrete action, it's on dialogue, it's on embodiment, it's on spirituality, it could be on self-consciousness also. So we try and highlight these things through autoethnography, appearing as relational and institutional stories affected by history, social structure and culture, which themselves are dialectically revealed through action, feeling, thought and language. What is history? What is history? When we talk about history, I have a friend who's a history professor. With due respect to what she does, she's brilliant, she's world renowned, and she does European history. Now, history is expressions of people. What are historical reports? Expressions of people, stories written by people. Journalists report. Reporting is the understanding and interpretation of the facts available to us. So these are, when we talk about autoethnography is different from historical reporting. Historical reporting is seeing things as a non-participant. Here you are a participant observer, sometimes a person who has been deeply affected by the situation. It appears as relational and institutional stories affected by history, social structure and culture, which themselves are dialectically revealed through action, feeling, thought and language. So history as experienced by people who have gone through that historical event. Now that adds more value let's not call it value, that adds more meat. It enriches the whole expression of the historical event. It enriches the whole recording of the historical event. Okay. Challenges faced by autoethnographers. The first challenge is narration of one's own experiences. One may not be very good at writing. You may have experienced something very traumatic, very different, very, very exciting, but you may lack the words. So it's how good you are at expressing your own lived experiences. Ability to understand, acknowledge, introspect, and reveal one's emotions, feelings, motives, or contradictions. Now, being able to express is one thing, but being able to honestly put it out in the public domain is a whole different ball game. And we'll just come down to some more challenges. So, confronting things about oneself that are less than flattering. When we do real, honest, good autoethnography, we reveal things about ourselves. First, we confront them. We accept that, yes, this happened to me. I behaved in XYZ manner. So, we are also exposing our vulnerabilities in a difficult situation. So, we first confront things about oneself that are less than flattering, that may not be the ideal ways of behaving. So, we say, I did this. Somebody else may say, there could have been a better way. Yes, but then historically, this is what I did. Okay. Honest autoethnography generates a lot of fears and doubts and emotional pain. I had a discussion with somebody collecting stories about the Indo-Pak partition, and people go and collect stories. When people talk about what happened to their families, how their families migrated, they were picked up from their homes, they were uprooted from their towns, they were forced to leave their belongings behind. Sometimes they were traveling in groups, hordes of people were traveling together, and then they would rest midway. And so when all those thoughts come to you, you don't know where you're going, you don't know if you'll survive the journey. You see people getting killed, you are in the middle of riots, or maybe if somebody tries to talk to these people who have been affected by the earthquake in Japan or the train accident, it brings back a flood of emotions because you've gone through that experience. It hurts you inside to even talk about it. Anyone who has gone through a traumatic experience knows that yes, on the one hand, it is relaxing, one can vent when one talks about it, but it also somehow scratches the scabs that have formed over or in the healing process. So one revisits the incident and pain comes up. So emotional pain is there. When we discuss these things, when we do autoethnography, when we are revisiting incidents, when we are gazing into the past, the emotions that we experienced, the sense of loss, the sense of betrayal, the difficult experience, the emotions associated with the difficult experience that we went through are highlighted, and they come back to us. So that is another challenge here. Not having any control over how your readers interpret what you have written about what you experienced. And one can't blame someone. I'll just give you a very personal example. Unless one loses a member of one's family, one doesn't know what it means to lose a member of one's immediate family. We can try as hard as we want, but unless one has really gone through that experience, you don't know what it means. Unless you are in the middle of an earthquake, you see the building that you were standing in fall, you fall down along with it, you don't know what it means to have that happen to you. We can be as empathetic, as sensitive as we want. So we don't know how the readers are going to interpret it. Readers may be very sensitive, but the same pain, the same perspective cannot be expected from somebody who has not gone through a similar experience. Now, when we talk about objective research, we are talking about replication of information. We are talking about the same interpretation coming out of similar experiences. then we are talking about something different. But when we are talking about something as rich as an autoethnographical account, we are concerned about how people will view our interpretations. Their interpretations of the same situation may be different, but our interpretations are, laced, and laced is a very mild word. Our interpretations are thickly layered with our emotions, and those emotions have in turn contributed to our experience of those emotions, and that has in turn contributed to our responses to the environment in which we experienced something, and that in turn has affected the way the environment experienced that particular event. So everything we experienced and everything we felt has contributed to the cumulative experience of the community that we were a part of when we were experiencing that particular event. Because whatever I felt at that time was affecting the way I behaved with my peers, with my family, with my friends, with others I did not know, and that in turn affected their experience. That became a part of their experience within the environment, and what they felt as a result of my behavior affected the way they responded to me and to the others in the environment. So everybody's responses laced with their emotions became a part of the cumulative experience of the collective experience of the community that they were a part of, and in turn influenced the experience of the community itself. Okay, so that's one big challenge. You don't know how people are going to interpret things. Feeling of humiliation regarding oneself and one's family members and loved ones, especially if the experience is negative. That is another challenge, but then some of us really take the plunge and do autoethnography. Methods of autoethnography: we have systematic sociological introspection, one of the methods. Then we have biographical method, we have personal experience methods, we have feminist methods which are based on critical theory, narrative inquiry, consciousness raising methods, co-constructed narrative, because we are talking about us in relation to others within a particular experience. So my experience as viewed by somebody I'm close to, somebody who has gone through that experience with me, so that becomes co-constructed narrative. What I see myself as and what people who were close to, who were experiencing the same phenomenon along with me, saw my experience as, can become a part of this co-constructed narrative. Interactive interviewing, various ways in which we can do autoethnography. Now, some approaches to autoethnography: reflexive ethnographies. Authors use their own experiences in the culture reflexively to bend back on self and look more deeply at self-other interactions and explain their interactions with others in light of the information they have now, and say, maybe I did this, I could have done, I had these other options available to me even at that time that I missed. So being able to critically evaluate one's lived experiences and maybe change the way one feels about them, or at least question the way one felt about those situations when one was in that situation. The researcher's personal experience becomes important primarily in how it illuminates the culture under study. So your personal experience, like I've been telling you right from the beginning of this class, that whatever you experience is going to ultimately feed into the cumulative experience of the community. So one becomes, we recognize how our experience, how our interpretations fed into the overall experience, into the overall cultural flow of the community that we are a part of. Then, radical empiricism is a process that includes the ethnographer's experiences and interaction with other participants as vital parts of what is being studied. So we try and see how our experiences and our interactions with other participants have affected or are connected to whatever we are studying. Excuse me. Native ethnographies relate to ethnographies by researchers who are natives of cultures that have been marginalized or exoticized. Either they have been elated, elevated. So exoticized is related to the word exotic. So cultures that have been either marginalized or exoticized by others write about and interpret their own cultures for others. People from within the community say, this is who I am, this is what I experienced, this is what others say about my experience, about my community. That is native ethnography. Now in this we have 3 different ways of approaching native ethnographies. We have complete member researchers who write from the perspective of complete member researchers. Researchers explore groups of which they are already members, or in which during the research process they have become full members with complete identification and acceptance. So it's me as a representative of a particular culture, knowing fully well that I embody most of the characteristics of that particular culture or community that I am describing. Personal narratives. Social scientists take on the dual identities of academic and personal selves to tell autobiographical stories about some aspect of their experience in their daily life. So this is the zooming in, zooming out part. Personal narratives. I see it, I experience it, I describe it the way I've experienced it, then I distance myself and take on an identity of a social researcher. Okay, so me as a participant, me as a researcher, and I explain the same event from the perspective of these 2 hats that I'm wearing, as a person who experienced it and as a person studying what was experienced at that time. Then literary autoethnographies, an author's primary identification is as an autobiographical writer rather than as a social scientist. So this is at the other end of the spectrum. So I'm describing my life, I'm not really bringing my role as a social scientist into the picture, and the text focuses as much on examining a self autobiographically as on interpreting a culture for a non-native audience. So we describe that, this is what happened to me, but then we also describe things that may have been obvious to people who are from the same culture. So that becomes a literary autoethnography. Some criticisms to autoethnographies. Critics say the stories give life a structure it does not have and thus fictionalize life. So critics say that we add elements to life that may not really have been present in describing something from our own perspective as people who experienced life or a slice of life at that point. The other criticism is that the personal narrative reflects or advances a romantic construction of the self unworthy of being classified as part of social science, and in doing so the goal becomes therapeutic rather than analytic. So it's just a way of venting, it's just a way of telling people about ourselves, it's just a way of tooting one's own horn, for want of a more diplomatic phrase here, but we just tell the world what we experienced and get on with it. It's not analytic, it's just telling people me, this is what I experienced, this is what happened to me, this is how I did things. So it becomes more therapeutic, it gives us a chance to vent, to express our lived experiences to share our lived experiences with others who may not necessarily be connected with it, or who may not even be, who may not want to see it in that light, who may want to see this from an objective perspective. So whereas when we talk about an analytic focus, we are talking about pulling things apart and saying that anyone in this situation would have experienced it like this. When we do autoethnography, we say I experienced it. Somebody else will say, I experienced it differently. Somebody else will say, I experienced it differently. So different researchers say that. But then people who are more keen on, or who talk about, who prefer the analytic method, will say, well, when we put all of these I's together, then some common theme must emerge. Otherwise, this interpretation based on I experienced this meaningless. So that is what this criticism is all about. Now I will take 1 or 2 extra minutes. I know we don't have them, but I want to show you a book that a renowned researcher has written, and I'll see if I can get her to give us a 5-minute video clip. But so maybe we can have that as a part of this. Now I'll just see if I can get this here. Otherwise I will share the details of that book with you in the reference section. And this is an autoethnographic account of the Rwandan genocide, written by Dr. Khadija Niransekwe, who is a very dear friend who was within, who went through the Rwandan genocide and then wrote about her experience for her as her PhD thesis, and then the thesis was converted into a book, and the book is called When the Lances Were Looking Down. And this is, I'm not saying this because she's my friend, I'm saying this because this book has been reviewed and has been accepted, acknowledged as a very good book on that uses autoethnography as an approach to research. Sorry, The Lances Were Looking Down, One Woman's Path Through the Rwandan Genocide to Life in the States. So she was part of this, she was affected by the genocide, and then she fled, and then she went to the United States, picked up the threads of her life again, and started. So this is the book. So anyway, so I'll see if I can, here, was Khadija Niransekwe was born in Rwanda and lived in Rwanda through the 94 genocide. She immigrated to the United States in 1998 and graduated from University of Denver with a master's in social work and PhD. And that's where I met her during my PhD days, and she's a very dear friend. So if I can get her on video, I will. But thank you very much for listening. I think we are way out of time, and we'll continue with some more strategies of inquiry into qualitative research in the next class. Thank you.